Hello everyone, and welcome to This Nintendo Life. My name is Nbz, and this is episode 95, the post-E3 episode. We're coming down from a high.
I'm sad.
And, yeah, it's time to wallow in our sadness.
We now have to wait an entire year for E3.
This is true, Bally, but the thing with Nintendo is they kind of don't treat E3 the way most other companies do, in the sense that we always have another Nintendo Direct on the horizon. And that's the fun thing about covering Nintendo, is like, it'll be a random Tuesday and they'll be like, oh, by the way, we have this, and you'll be like, oh shit, okay, well, something's happening.
When does it normally come following E3, the first Direct? Is it normally like September time or a bit before then?
I would say probably around September, mainly because you have the kind of pre-holiday stuff happening, them probably priming up their fall lineup and telling us what to expect. And we need final release dates for both Fire Emblem Warriors and Xenoblade Chronicles 2, so that has to happen, and I imagine that'll happen. Although I don't know, I feel like there might be, they've been doing this thing earlier this year, especially with ARMS and Splatoon, where they're like, okay, we're focusing on these individual games for Directs. I don't know if the era of the like general Nintendo Direct is passed by, but
I mean,
we'll
they
see.
sort of did that indie roundup one, which was great. And
yeah, and I mean, I think they're probably going to do more of that stuff, like showcases and just like not necessarily
specific
titling
things.
them as directs, but
Right.
focusing on specific things for sure.
Spotlights.
I hope we get some updates on some things, like when Stardew Valley is coming and some other indie games. That would be great. But we will have plenty of time to talk about all this stuff in the weeks ahead. For now, Bally, how about you tell the people what we're going to be doing on today's show?
On today's show, for our first segment, we are, as usual, going to be talking about the games that we have been playing. And then for our second segment, it's going to be an extended segment, wrapping up some of our final thoughts on this E3. We caught up on a few more little announcements that we're gonna talk over and give you the lowdown.
Yeah, absolutely. Always got to do the mop up, because the thing with Nintendo is they keep doing Treehouse throughout the week, and so there's all these little bits of information and news and interviews that come out in the following days after the spotlight. So we are going to discuss that stuff, but before we do, we will talk about all these video games we've been playing, which is mainly Shovel Knight, Spectre of Torment. So Bally, how about you kick it off, because we've both beaten this at this point.
Yeah, I completed it. I think that as now the third campaign in the Shovel Knight trilogy so far, it's a solid game all around. It's another consistently very good 2D platformer, and I think that huge testament to Yacht Club Games for being able to provide with like three very differing campaigns that all are great in their own way. Like, I genuinely can't decide between the three which is my favorite, and like, I don't order them in any way in my head. I just think they're all really well done. I think that with Spectre of Torment, the main ability of sort of the new jump and the way that he can climb walls, so it's called like the dash slash, which is where you sort of dash through enemies and other floating enemies. I love the way that that's incorporated into the way that you traverse a stage. So they really make an effort in placing enemies and like lanterns and things that can swing about in order for you to jump, do a slash, a dash slash
Diagonal,
through,
yeah.
yeah,
slash
like
dash.
a diagonal through it. And then continue on platforming through the level. And like, it is quite tricky to get used to, because you can do it at two different angles.
Right.
And I certainly
so sometimes you
died-
have to like deliberately fall so that you can get the upward angle, which is interesting, because you're kind of putting yourself at risk in order to get where you need to be.
Exactly. And I like that it does that, because it forces you to not just dash through things automatically. You actually have to think about the way you dash. And like you said, time to like fall a bit sometimes in order to do the dash upwards rather than downwards. I think that it's just a really great mechanic that is utilized just throughout the game that works incredibly well.
Something that I didn't realize until I just thought about it now is this mechanic is incredibly similar to a mechanic you have in Ori and the Blind Forest, which in that game is the bash move, which slows down time while you do it, but you can basically rotate the analog stick to fling yourself in a direction. But it's very similar in terms of you can use enemies as like platforms to go past, as well as objects, and that game goes a little bit further, because what you can do is take enemy projectiles and throw them back at them. So there are these like spiders which shoot like these web things at you, and you can like reflect them back at them and actually do damage to them. So I think probably one of the reasons why I enjoyed this so much is because it was quite similar to that game, which is one of my favorites, and I think has a very interesting, use of that mechanic.
I just love that this game does like another series of fresh takes on existing, stuff that's in Shovel Knight. So all the boss battles have been changed up, and like there's new elements to each of the boss battles. Some are more similar to the original game than others, but some are just completely different.
They definitely had to change them, I think, because of the ability for you to kind of spam the attack while you're in the air. Like the homing missile nature of it meant that a boss like King Knight would be completely inept fighting you if they didn't change it up so that he had the blocks that would like disappear, so you could potentially fall down them. Like adding that element to that fight, I think, was very important, because otherwise it would have been incredibly boring. Like I think most of the boss fights are pretty easy generally, but they do add elements in there to complicate things so that you don't have such an easy time.
Yeah, definitely. And they're all done really well. I also love the way that existing music in the Shovel Knight series has just been remixed for this game. And like there are some incredibly addictive, well-mastered sort of remixes of existing songs, which are just done so well. Like it's just such a good soundtrack to this game.
Yeah, it's one of those things that when I was listening to it, I'm like, is this like a Mega Man song? Because this really sounds like something that, would have been in those old Capcom games. And, you have Jake Kaufman, who's still providing music and just does a fucking bang-up job. I think that's an element that can't be understated. And I think it's going to be interesting when they move on to their next project, whatever it is, because a lot of the charm of Shovel Knight is obviously using that 8-bit style, and say they go 3D or they go 16-bit, I feel like they might lose a bit of that, but I'm still excited for where they go with that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And what else about this game? The darkness and the curio. So like will's like your health, then you have darkness meter, which is basically fuels your curios. So curios can be, there's one that's like a rebounding soul. It's like this projectile that just bumps around the stage. There's one that lets you literally kind of fly for a few seconds. There's another one that can regenerate health. Like they're all really...
Regenerating health one is by far the most useful, I found.
By far. And the only downside to it is it takes a bit of time to sort of use. So if you're in sort of the genuine heat of battle and there's stuff coming at you, it will... If you get knocked while you're trying to use it, you can get flinched out of it. But
you're right. If the animation is interrupted, there goes the health.
But like you said, it's still easily the most powerful by a mile. Probably followed by the flying one, maybe. That was certainly fun to use in the.
Yeah, I mean, they both generally made the game quite easy, I felt. Like the platforming stuff was definitely the most challenging part, because they really, in terms of enemies, I appreciate a lot of what they did, but I don't think they ever found a solution to get past the kind of overpowered nature of that homing kind of attack that Spectre Knight has.
And one of the toughest parts of the game was actually just like a side quest in the game where you get rewarded with money that I spent like 2 hours on.
Yeah,
I told you about Nbz, and it took you like bloody 20 minutes or something. But
yeah.
It was like a really nice side part of the game where you're basically going up a vertical scrolling stage, and the main mechanic of using the dash slash to home in on floating lanterns and things is utilized to work your way up this structure. And obviously the ability to dash onto walls, climb up those walls, and rinse and repeat is like just so crucial to this. And I think after doing that, I actually played the rest of the game a lot more comfortably, and like I understood the mechanics a lot more and had practice. I think
the interesting part of that segment is it kind of reminds me of Rogue Legacy in that there are sections that have been clearly designed by the developers, but they're randomized.
They randomly generate, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, in Rogue Legacy, it's a roguelike, but the rooms are all hand-designed. Like, this shaft is completely hand-designed, but they'll throw different parts at you at different times, so you're always kept on your feet, and every run is like, you're not just... I think the nice thing about it is you're not getting bored doing every run, because it keeps it fresh by mixing it up every time.
Yeah, like it's a nice little thing on the side, and generally I think the game is a bit leaner and tighter perhaps than the other two campaigns.
There's no world map, right? Because you're basically...
Lack of an overworld, it works well.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the shift from Mario Galaxy to Galaxy 2,
right,
where from one game you had this hub where you could walk around and kind of explore a bit, and this game is like go to a menu, choose, and you can do them in any order, which I like that. I think that's a good thing to give the player, and it was interesting because what it allowed them to do was have much more interesting story segments. And Shovel Knight is not the deepest of stories. It's not anything to kind of get excited about, but
it's still a really neat story, like a prequel story, we should say, without spoiling anything further. But it's just a really nice way to fit into the other two tales from Shovel Knight and I was going to say Spectre of Torment, Plague of Shadows. Like, this game just links to those stories nicely. Like, it works really well.
The thing that I really loved about it was that there are sections which are playable that tie into the storytelling.
Really cool.
And you have this kind of black and white look to them, and you are kind of like, oh, these two characters you're playing as, and you're kind of wondering what's going on, and it's unfolding these things, but it's also taking you through a new stage that has been designed by the designers. And I thought that stuff was a clever way of giving you storytelling without being too exposition heavy, right? Because I think that in these 2D games, it's very difficult to carry a narrative, mainly because you don't have the the cutscene to give you that space to work in, and it's difficult to convey emotion or to convey any sense of like danger or threat in a space that is just a 2D kind of animated segment. And if you're playing it, you can kind of convey that in a way that is more immediate.
It works well in the sense where you can click on a regular level and then a bit of story will just force its way in there, where characters come in, stuff happens. I don't want to say what stuff happens necessarily, but like things change, and you were just expecting to click on the level and play on that with that level, but actually you have to do this other little thing first, and then something's revealed, and then you move on. And like, there's just lots of little bits of story along the way that just force themselves on you, that not in an overbearing way, but just in like a nod to, hey, look, this is actually the underlying story going on. Let's talk about it. And it's very seamless, and like I said earlier, very lean. Like, it works well, I think.
Yeah. The one part of that I didn't like was sometimes I would have beaten a level and got a ton of gold, and then it forces me into a story sequence. I'm like, oh no, I still have the same amount of gold. I kind of wish that like they would have taken those stats away and not focused on like the UI elements and stuff when you're in the past sequences. But yeah, there was a moment where I was like, oh fuck, I just fell in a hole here and I lost a ton of money because I just got loads from that last level. But it's a very minor critique in what is essentially a very, very well delivered free DLC package, as it were.
The game's fairly good with money in a number of senses. So the curios, like we were talking about earlier, are actually bought through using red skulls, which are like a separate collectible 10 per level. And then I believe there's like 9, I think there's as many curios as there are levels, or maybe one less. I can't quite remember, but it's nice.
It's similar to the original Shovel Knight, so if you don't find it within the level, you can pay money to get it from whoever's selling it, right?
I don't think you can get curios that way, but I know you can get the boosts to your Will and Darkness, which are another collectible.
You can get the curios not the curios. You can get the There's something else you can get.
There's a boost. You can boost each curio using 4,000 gold.
Right.
But to get the curio initially, you do need the red skull, I believe. But
No, you're right. I think it's just the will and darkness boost that because each or there are a few stages that have like, hey, you can. It's basically a heart container essentially, right?
Yeah, exactly. So like, and the game says, oh, you missed it, but if you've got all this money, we'll let you have it anyway. Like it works nicely. Yeah, I just think overall it's all done really well, and I like how Shovel Knight just sort of we get another campaign each year. So like what
always returning to it.
Right, so it's 2017 now. Shovel Knight first came out 2014, 2015. I guess. 15. So we've had like 15, 16, 17, and then I think the next is King Knight, I believe. I don't quite know because it's Shovel Knight now Treasure Trove.
Yeah, I think Yacht Knight I said Yacht Knight. I think Yacht Club have stated that they might be trying to get King Knight out this year as well.
Oh man,
which would be nice because then they can try and move on to something else. And we've both talked about this before in the past about how you have wanted them to just leave the shit behind and do something new. But I really think, and I think I was reading through a NeoGAF thread and people were like, yeah man, I'm so glad that Yacht Club, that they did a great Kickstarter, they've kept their promise. Like I really think there would have been a stink kicked up about it if they had not gone through on these. It would have been bad, but you can't argue with free, right? Like they are putting these out. And I think it's great that they've put it on Switch because I'm sure they'll have made a bunch of money from having the treasure trove on there from new owners of people who probably haven't played it before. And that's going to be good for them. And it makes sense that they kind of change their business model up a bit and doing them separately and also all as a package. But I'm excited for their future. And I don't know, when I think about those levels that we go through playing Shovel Knight, it's really astonishing how much they do to retain like the sense and the level design from the original, but also change it up enough to feel completely different. It's very well done.
It's incredibly well done. And like I just saying to my friend Alex, who I just saw this weekend, he bought the like Shovel Knight on PS4 and he's not gone back to it since the original game. And I said like, you should go back to it. Like they've got 3 DLCs. Like they've got free DLC. I was like, yeah, they've got like 2 whole new campaigns on top of Shovel Knight. And he was like, oh wow, I should try that out. I was like, yeah, you should. It's amazing. I've spent like close to 30 hours with this game doing 3 separate campaigns. Like it's so much stuff to do, and obviously more to come.
Yeah, I'm glad that it finally came out on the 3DS in Europe, which is the platform that I own it on, and I think it is literally the last platform to get this game, because they had to like slowly roll it out. I don't know what the hell goes on with like certification and all this shit, because for Plague Knight, it all came out on all platforms at the same time, like no matter where in the world you were. The original Shovel Knight was delayed here by like 4 or 5 months. I remember us going, like I was in particular really annoyed about it, because it was like, where the hell is this game that America's had for so long? And then with this one, it was another like weird rollout where it came out first on Switch, and then like Wii U in America, and then 3DS in America, and then Wii U here, and 3DS here. I don't know how all this shit works, but I think Nintendo, the one thing that I'm so thankful for is that I'm never going to have to deal with this shit again, because with region free on the Switch, it's great. Like, as soon as I get another game, like the new Fire Emblem, no worries, Bally. It's going to be everywhere at the same time.
Yeah. And that, like, I want Shovel Knight on Switch. Like, obviously it's there already, but we're waiting on that D-pad. I mean, I'm going to pick up that Pro controller, but it's not quite, it's good, but I want the ability to play it on the go. That's the thing. So
speaking of the Pro controller, Bally, let's have a quick chat about it, because I did try it. So our good friend, buddy old pal Ali T is back in the country. And so I was, I went over to his place, and he just got a Switch. He's very invested in Zelda. He's enjoying it a lot.
First time he's bought a Nintendo console near launch in a long time.
I think Ali T is the perfect example of the lapsed Nintendo fan, of people who ignored the Wii U. I think a lot of that also has to do with the fact that he was very busy and doing a lot of studying and didn't want to get distracted, which is understandable. But also because the Wii U just wasn't a great proposition for someone like him, right?
Yeah.
And they've come back strong out the gate with a new Zelda, which is his bread and butter. So I had no doubt he was going to want to switch just for Breath of the Wild. But he picked up Mario Kart and ARMS, so he owns more Switch games than I do at this point. And he got a Pro controller. He basically went all the works.
He's just going for it. He's just binging.
Absolutely, which is fair enough. And I got to try out the Pro controller at his place. So I think that controller is really fucking good. It feels fantastic. It's a step up in a lot of ways from the Wii U Pro controller, which I still think is really a good controller, and I like it. It has more of a heftiness to it. It feels like a better product in the sense that I like the Wii U Pro controller, but I always felt it was a little plasticky. Like, it had the same kind of texture and feel that the Wii U gamepad did. Yeah. And that was never something that was... It never felt as kind of sturdy or as weighty as a PS4 or an Xbox controller, despite the fact that it performed functionality just as well as those. But the obvious difference is it's basically got the 360 layout now, which is the offset sticks. And the D-pad seems to work pretty well. I didn't really use it with anything because I was mainly playing ARMS. It's around the size of a 360 controller. I think it's probably a bit smaller than the Wii U Pro.
As in the D-pad, sorry.
Oh, the D-pad. Yeah, I think it is. So I didn't really get to use it because I was playing ARMS, and ARMS doesn't really use the D-pad that much. But it just feels very comfortable in your hand, and triggers are good. The face buttons are nice and big, which that's definitely for people who don't like the tiny little Joy-Con buttons. But it works well. I don't really have much else to say about it other than I'll get one eventually. But out the gate trying it out, I'm left with a solid impression. But speaking of ARMS, I've played some more of it because LET had the game, and I went through a bit of the Grand Prix mode. And essentially what the game asks you is, in order to unlock ranked, which is basically just the 1 versus 1, like none of the random bombs, none of the like heal pool areas, just straight up, Final Destination, Fox only Final Destination essentially. It's the competitive mode. In order to unlock that, you need to beat Grand Prix on rank 4, which is pretty tough, I have to say. So I was playing with the Pro controller, not the Joy-Cons, and man, the inability to curve individual punches was kind of starting to show in that scenario because there was some really good AI going on that was tough to predict and would block your supers. Like, they were on top of a lot of stuff, and that was rank 4 out of 7. And apparently, like, it gets pretty insane if you try and take it on at a high level. But I spent like the good part of like half an hour or so just trying to do the first fight in rank 4. And I was like,
out of how many fights?
10 you have to go through.
Oh my god.
But the nice thing about it is it allows you to save your progress in between. So you can do like save and quit. So like, the 10 Mario challenge or whatever the hell in Mario Maker.
Right.
You can basically like get to a point and be like, I'll save it for later. So I currently have because I started a save file on my own Switch. I basically took it out of his and put it into mine. So I now have an ARM save file, which if I get the game, I can put it back in and continue. So I basically got up to like the 4th or 5th match in ranked. And yeah, it was really, really tough, but I think it's worth going through because you'll learn a lot more about, how to play the game and the timing for dodging and blocking and stuff, but it will open up the ability to play basically what me and you wanted to do, which was the 1 versus 1 stuff. Yeah. My worry with that, and it still is a worry, is that in the ranked mode, everyone's going to be super try hard. So I have a feeling that unless the matchmaking is good, which I haven't got a chance to try, you might just get smoked by people. And that will not be a good experience because the thing with the party mode is it's just so random and it throws you in so much bollocks that you don't necessarily get the outcome you want. Like, if you go in there just wanting some 1 versus 1 matches, you can't do that. And I was afraid of this when I talked about it before, and it seems like it's the case with the final game. But
it was a tweet that I noticed you'd retweeted from our good friend of the show, Toby, who simply said, "I love and hate ARMS."
It's just like Nintendo, isn't it? I love and hate Nintendo. It's basically the perfect succinct.
They get so much right, and they can get so much wrong, all at the same time.
Yeah, look, Bally. Ultimately, I think ARMS is a great game, and I think honestly, it just has a bit of a content problem. I wish there was a more fleshed out story mode, because going through the Grand Prix, it's essentially very
Mario
little
Kart.
setup for every match. Yeah, here's the thing about it. This is the Mario Kart team.
Exactly.
So why we were all hanging on tender hooks for a grand story mode, I don't know, because they've proven in the past they don't give a fuck about that. Aside from mission mode in DS.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is the one kind of shining grace. Like, imagine if ARMS had a mission mode style thing. That would be fantastic, right? Like, that would be the sort of thing that would push me over the edge to get this game. But as it stands, it feels like the skill ceiling is not super high, and that's probably me speaking out of turn because I don't fucking know fighting games, but it seems like there's far less to learn, right? Like, in something like a Street Fighter or even a Smash Brothers, there are so many different moves your characters can do, whereas this, it really comes down to a core trinity of, like, punching, blocking, and dodging, and you have the, switching it up with the different types of arms and the charge moves and different characters having their abilities, but when you put it all together, it doesn't have the same, like, variety in terms of fighting style, and I think that's the thing that holds me back on it a lot. So I'll probably pick it up eventually, but for now, going through that single player stuff and looking at it, I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of glad I didn't bite, because there's a lot of good games coming out for the rest of the year for Nintendo. Mario Rabbids, Xenoblade 2, and Mario Odyssey alone is good enough for me. And that's not to mention Splatoon 2 or a bunch of indies and Rocket League and all this stuff. So I feel justified. Yeah, it's good. So the other thing that I've been playing, which I started a while ago and I just came back to last couple of days, is Darksiders, which is a game that is actually it's a Wii U game that came out after Breath of the Wild. Can you believe it? Because THQ Nordic, the company who basically, Nordic Games bought they didn't buy THQ. They bought a lot of THQ's properties when THQ went under, and they have now rebranded themselves as THQ Nordic. A lot of people are speculating that they are eventually just going to call themselves THQ, and then be in a very weird situation where we have this company called THQ who is not actually THQ but still own all their properties. Anyway, bit of a mess. But they put out remastered versions of Darksiders 1 and 2, and Darksiders War Mastered Edition came out on Wii U. I've had it for a long time. Darksiders is a weird series with me, Bally, in terms of buying games, because I bought the first one on PS3 on a sale fucking years ago, then I got it on Steam, then I got the Darksiders 2 Wii U Humble Bundle code, so I own, like, these two games in, like, 5 different platforms. It's ridiculous, and I haven't played either of them yet, so this is why I'm trying to correct, a sin and actually get through my Steam backlog. But this War Mastered Edition I got on Steam as well, and I've been going through it, and a lot of people talk about Darksiders as the one game in the last few years that has tried to ape Zelda. And when we say ape Zelda, we don't mean, its new modern iteration, but we mean the classic kind of dungeon design and puzzle solving of old. And it's a very interesting game because I think it is definitely at its strongest when it is focusing in on that dungeon stuff. The map will look very familiar to anyone who's played a Zelda game before. There are, multiple floors, you have locks and doors, not necessarily keys, but things that are kind of, analogs for keys and stuff like that. But aesthetically, it's completely different because it's essentially focused on the story of the four horsemen and the apocalypse. And there are a lot of demons you're killing and a lot of, enemies that you're taking down that look like Hellspawn. And you play as one of the four horsemen, who is War. It was interesting because I think like the initial pitch of Darksiders was we're going to have these four horsemen and we're going to have 4 different games where you play all of them different characters, and it seems like they're going to get to do that now because Darksiders 3 just recently got announced, and one of them, Fury, is now going to be playable. I think they changed, because the actual Horsemen of the Apocalypse, like Death, War, Strife, and Famine or something, and they've changed the last 2 to Fury and something else. In any case, it's basically a much more dour game than Zelda. It's the kind of edgy, dark Zelda that a lot of people maybe wanted and never got. Although Twilight Princess is arguably that, also Majora's Mask to some degree. But yeah, it's very different in that way, and it has it's got cutscenes and story stuff that honestly I haven't really been paying too much attention to because it's a lot of go kill the thing and take the thing and I don't know. this is what happens in a lot of these games where I'm just playing this because it's
Just
a video
need some
game.
mechanics.
I just need some mechanics. But yeah, so it's interesting because the dungeon I just went through was slightly different from the first one. First one felt more like, and this is kind of referencing Mark Brown because of his like Zelda dungeon Boss Keys series, where he kind of breaks down.
Make sure to
how,
check that out.
Yeah, oh god, one of the best things going on YouTube right now. But he talks about Wind Waker as its dungeon design being quite linear because it kind of loops itself. The dungeons basically loop you back to where you need to be. And the first dungeon didn't feel like that. The first dungeon felt a bit more open and like you're going back and forth and having to figure things out. Whereas the second one fell more into the kind of Wind Waker design lineage, where it's like, okay, it's much more linear. We're kind of taking you from room to room and you're figuring things out as you go. And you will go back to rooms you've been to before, but the game design will loop you back there naturally.
Right.
And I think both of us still like that, that sort of dungeon design.
Yeah, definitely.
I know that Mark Brown kind of criticizes it, but for me, I prefer something like Wind Waker to A Link's Awakening because it's not, it is mainly the 2D versus 3D thing, but I don't necessarily like getting too lost in those dungeons. Like for me, the dungeon puzzle isn't where I'm going. It's more about the micro puzzles within the thing itself. Right.
You don't want to get too. You want it to be just the right amount of lost, and there are some dungeons in even Wind Waker where you can get mildly lost, but there's not to the same degree as walking around aimlessly in Link's Awakening, wondering what the hell is going on.
Right. Yeah. There's some tough stuff in that game for sure, but it's interesting because already I've seen that Darksiders kind of does both, which is cool, and there's a lot of kind of things that are going to be similar to Zelda games, but in terms of the actual combat, it's much more kind of action game inspired. Like, I've not played God of War, but if I were to, I would imagine it kind of plays like this, like a lot of kind of hacky slashy. There are combos that you can learn. A lot of the unlocks are based on different moves that you can do, and it's been okay. It actually has a kind of Z targeting thing, which is kind of surreal because I don't think a lot of games like directly do that Z targeting thing these days. So it's weird to see it like, it's the same thing as Zelda where the black bars come down from the bottom and top of the screen. It's like exactly the same. So it's weird seeing that pop up. But for me, a lot of the stuff that's in between the dungeons feels very pad heavy. You get to these kind of giant iron golems that block the entrance to the next place you need to be. And every time you come across one, they're like, I am trapped here, go clear out these 5 places that are holding me. And you literally have to go to these 5 different locations that are just kill rooms with enemies. They have like, they have different restrictions, which is like, okay, only kill them with the environmental kills, or protect these 6 guards while you get attacked by a bunch of other things. Like, that's the sort of stuff I don't really like doing, like, and it's just killing things and it's just focusing on the combat, but it's like it's a little bit too paddy for my liking. And then after those segments, you usually go through another area, which is like, just a ton of enemies thrown at you and you're just kind of fighting through them to get to where you want to be. So I think that they faced the problem of, we want this game to feel a bit longer, but we don't really know what to do aside from throwing a bunch of enemies to kill at you. So here, have these. And it really seems like a game of two halves where the dungeon design is really good and very satisfying and super cool and interesting, but the stuff in between just feels not as well designed. It's kind of the Shantae problem that I had with that game, where it's definitely, I don't think it's as bad in Shantae because you have, the linear corridors that you go to get to kind of Metroid-style areas are much shorter than what you do in Darksiders, but It's still the same issue that I had there. But I'm enjoying it still, and I think it's worth it to push through the mashy kind of combat stuff to get to the dungeons because, like, no other video games do that, Like, it's really shocking that no one apes Zelda, and I wish more games did because I think that stuff is super fun and really engaging, and I want to see more of it. And especially with Zelda going off in this new direction, like even now we don't have traditional dungeons.
There's now
Zelda
a gap.
Games, so.
There's
exactly.
a gap for the Nbz to come in and say, "Hey, we're going to make traditional Zeldas."
Yeah, absolutely. So I hope that comes up, and I'm sure there will be more in the years to come. But for now, I'm enjoying it, and we'll see where we go. But that is going to cover us for the first section of the show. We will be back after the break to wrap up E3 and talk about all the things that we missed last time. So don't go anywhere. We will be right back. Alright everyone, welcome back to the second half of the show, and there's a bit of cleanup happening right now. You know, E3 has happened, not a lot else going on, so I guess we're going to talk about a few things. We're going to mop up our predictions, which we didn't do before. We want to see how well we did, and then we're going to dive into talking about some of the Treehouse stuff, as well as a couple of other announcements that Nintendo made after everything was done with the Spotlight, and they had, you know, couple of days of Treehouse going on, so some interesting stuff in there, and some also interesting interviews going around with Reggie and various people at Nintendo. So before we kick off this segment, Bally, how about you tell everyone where they can send emails, because that's going to happen next time and we need some more of those.
Yes, please send your post E3 emails to ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That is ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. Please send them in. But Nbz,
all right,
how about we get on to some E3 prediction roundup?
Yes, please do. Bally, will you lay it out?
Who wants to? Shall we just run through each person? So who wants to step up to the chopping block first?
I think you should go through mine first and then go through yours.
Right, Nbz, are you ready?
Yes.
Your first prediction was that there would be announced a Nintendo-based online card game. Idea of Hanafuda cards keeps with their history, and it's a bit like Smash and Mario Kart, brings characters from their franchises together, genre they haven't tackled before, and could put their own unique spin on it. Are you going to claim any points, Nbz?
No, Nintendo, they didn't really do much new IP stuff going on here. Well, technically did later in the Treehouse live stream, but yeah, I would have liked for this to happen, and it still could happen. I stand by it as a possibility, but no, there's no points being claimed there. That was my out there prediction, so I'll say that much.
That's good. You said we would see Retro's new game. It's a new IP, and it's going to release in the first quarter of 2018. Some kind of story-driven game.
Yeah, no, didn't happen. We still don't know.
It's unbelievable we don't know what Retro's working on. How many E3s has that been since they announced Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze? That was E3 2013. So yeah, we're now E3 2017, and that's fourth year in a row we haven't heard anything.
Do you think we'll hear about it before the end of the year?
I don't see why you would announce what Retro's working on outside of an E3, you know? There's so much hype. Well, I don't know.
I say because, you know, they haven't announced any kind of lineup for the start of next year. I think we can kind of maybe get an idea that Yoshi and Kirby will probably be early 2018. But you're going to have... Do
we know that Retro's not working on either of those games?
No, exactly. So, yeah, I don't know. I think that there will be a Direct later this year, but I feel like Retro's games probably will be announced next year. I don't necessarily think it'll be next E3, but maybe in a Direct early in the year could be possible. We'll see. They've been taking their time, for sure.
You predicted that the Virtual Console will be discussed, but not a launch. That will wait until the end of the year.
So no Virtual Console, and I believe we both had Virtual Console predictions, so this is all going to shit. Again, didn't really happen. And, well, I guess I'm just doing really good here, Bally, just nailing these predictions.
Here we go, let's try this one. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 will be coming out same day worldwide, December 2017. New trailer will show how some obvious connections to the original game, but will be set in the far, far future. Voice acting will be American and people will be mad because British voiceover is better.
Okay, so I may claim half a point here, because I said it was coming out, and it will be, as confirmed in an interview actually with Takahashi, that it is coming out same day worldwide everywhere, and it is holiday 2017. Now, the December thing hasn't been confirmed. I would put my money that it's probably going to happen then. But the rest of it actually, funnily enough, turned out how I wanted it to, which is that not only is it not being American localized, it's being done by NOE, who did the original Xenoblade, and we could tell from the trailer that there is a quite variety of different voices in there from all over the place.
Including some British ones.
Yeah, including British ones. So, yeah, that was good. I think the one thing, again, I didn't get right was they have said that this is not connected really in any way to the original Xenoblade. The way it's connected is it is a more story-driven game as opposed to X, which was more focused on exploration in the open world. This one has more of a narrative to it, and that's why it is named Xenoblade 2, because it's following in the mold of Xenoblade 1, which was a similar style of game.
And you don't think
I get why they would want to do that.
You think it'll be as expansive as the original Xenoblade is? It is surprisingly linear in its own right.
Yeah.
Do you think it'll follow in that mold where it will still be very expansive, but ultimately there's a linear path that the story goes down?
Yeah, I think it will. I 100% think they're gonna. That's the thing, and we saw how Zelda struggled to tell a story in an open world. I would say the same can be said for Xenoblade Chronicles X, where that story was not great and they couldn't do a good job with it because of the exploration focus. I think that with what we've seen from the cutscenes and the focus on voice acting and all that stuff, there is definitely going to be a linear path through this game. But, we'll talk about the Treehouse stuff later, but I watched a significant amount of that Xenoblade stuff, and there's a big kind of opening area to wander around, so it is not losing those elements that I do love. So,
and finally, you had a little throwaway prediction at the end, like you like to throw in during your normal E3 predictions.
Because I have to say it every fucking year.
Bally, I have to say it. It's going to happen this year. I believe in it. It's going to be 2D Metroid. Nbz, you nailed it. You finally nailed it.
Yeah, I did. But I don't get a point for it because it wasn't a part of my actual predictions. It was just like, I've got to say it.
So we'll give you half a point total, right?
Yeah, that might be fair. Maybe a third of a point with the Xenoblade thing. I don't know. But
you can have half a
I'll
point.
Take it.
It's going to be December, you know it. So,
yeah.
My first prediction was I thought Retro would announce what they're working on, and it would be Metroid Prime 4. And I thought that this would come out at the start of 2018, and there'd be a trailer. And yeah, it's not Retro, but it is Metroid Prime 4. It is definitely not coming out.
It is, and there's no fucking way in hell it's coming out early 2018.
There's no way it's coming out the first quarter of 2018. At this point in time, it's very unlikely it's even going to make 2018. So
exactly,
I'll take half a point because hey, I predicted Prime 4.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. You know what? You did say Metroid Prime 4, and the screen said Metroid Prime 4, so that's pretty good.
So I've got to get something.
I honestly didn't think they would go with the 4. I thought they would either do a reboot with like a subtitle or something like
Prime
that. But
Beginnings.
Yeah. I think we had a discussion about this last time where you were like, no, it's going to be 4. They're going to put a 4 on it. I was like, you sure they're not going to do like Origins or Revengeance or whatever? It's
very non-Nintendo to just go, well, 1, 2, 3, 4, like with a series like that.
It is.
I know they've finally gotten into that sort of mold with something like Mario Kart, and they've done it with the Mario parties. But, numbering things is more, that's kind of Sony's kind of thing. That's not really what Nintendo are into, which is...
No, they aren't.
Weird. So I'll take half a point. Second prediction, I've predicted a bunch of Virtual Console stuff that was even more elaborate and specific than what you had predicted. So I am so far off.
Shit out of luck on that one.
I truly hope that we get some information about Virtual Console in terms of a direct at some point. And I know you've got an interview to reference later on this, so
yes,
I'll leave it for now.
We'll discuss.
I predicted Smash was going to come probably this holiday. It's not. It's really not. It's not.
Nope.
It's not for a while. Even if it is coming 2018, we certainly don't know about it yet. So that's an unusual one. But like you said when I made this prediction, Nbz, this is the year of other multiplayer games where we're talking about Mario Kart Deluxe and ARMS and Splatoon 2, and like there's already a big online multiplayer space. And Pokken.
And if you're talking about fighting games, yeah, they are kind of stacked with both ARMS and Pokken Tournament. So I think the real thing with Nintendo here is they realize that Smash Brothers will cannibalize those other two fighting games if they talked about it now. So they want to let them have the limelight for the moment.
And finally, the infamous, the one and only, the Miiverse log.
I so wish it could have been true.
It didn't come, and nothing like UI related or anything to do with the Switch was revealed or announced or anything. So we are left with this very simplistic, basic menu with a few apps that don't do very much. And hey, got some great games, not complaining there, but you know, that UI, it's a bit dry, it's a bit bare, but that's how it's going to be for the time being.
Again, I'll reiterate, this is a Nintendo Direct announcement more than anything else. I think it's incoming. It will happen. So we shall wait for it, but for the meantime, I guess that puts us both on even keel, Bally, with half
draw,
a point each.
Nbz.
Yeah.
A score draw. Half a point.
You know, I think that's probably better than we do most years, to be fair.
It really is, to be honest.
I'll take it. I'll say that that's a win, and we'll move on. But in any case, it's fun to do those. You know, it's always fun. Interesting to reach out and just make up a bunch of bollocks. But even the safe predictions can go wrong, like your Smash Brothers one. It's like that. Surely that's a safe hit, but nope, not this year.
This time.
Anyway, so with that done and dusted, we can move into some discussion about some other stuff. They talked a lot about Mario Odyssey at the Treehouse. Now, you only saw the first opening kind of thing after the presentation, Bally. Right. I watched another segment that went a bit further around and showed off some different things. So the thing that I find interesting about this game is it seems to have taken some ideas from Banjo-Kazooie in the realm of the moons, right? Because in that game, in that series, you were never kicked out of a world for finding a Jiggy, right? And I think it was the notion that those were much more plentiful than the stars. I don't know this for sure, but I think Jiggies were there were more of them to collect in Banjo-Kazooie.
I thought you were making up a random word when you said Jiggy. I was just like, that's a really like a thingamajigger or something.
You really have no knowledge of Banjo-Kazooie at all, do you?
I really don't.
Yeah. As someone who hasn't played Banjo-Kazooie, I know a lot about it because, as I mentioned, I think on last episode or something, I watched way too many Let's Plays when I was younger.
You used to watch an absolute ton of Let's Plays.
So that's why I have a pretty good knowledge of a lot of video games that I've never played. But that said, the idea that, the original Mario 64 and Sunshine always, you got the star or the shine and then you teleported back out the world. That's not the case here. And it's also the case that the moons are just fucking everywhere. They are... You can find them just in random boxes. There was a segment where someone was going through and they smashed these two boxes that were glowing, and there was a moon in each of them on different sides of this room or whatever. And I was like, man, they're just giving these things out. So it seems that what they've done is they've created a density, right? And I think they were kind of talking about this idea that the Japanese word for, not sandbox or whatever, but the idea for these kind of games is based off this kind of miniature garden concept where everything in it is finely detailed and there's a lot of stuff crammed into this dense space. And that is the notion behind the worlds, or the kingdoms as they call them in Mario Odyssey, is everywhere you go there is going to be something kind of hidden away. And it seems a little bit of a departure in terms of the less focus on platforming, the more focus on exploring and discovering, which I don't know how I feel about, because there are some things in Galaxy that are exceptional on that kind of aspect of things, but this seems like it's making platforming take a little bit more of a backseat. I don't know how.
Yeah.
What do you think the kind of pitch they have for Odyssey has been like so far?
You're right. It's everyone sort of thinks that like, oh, this is back to that kind of more open world sense of exploration, a bit like Galaxy. But you're right. Ultimately, Galaxy was a lot more platforming based, and there were far fewer larger worlds where there was a greater sense of exploration. And this game feels like there are more levels with that wider sense of world, a bit like Sunshine arguably. I think this game is maybe more comparable to something like Sunshine than it is to something like Galaxy so far.
I mean, it is, because they've been saying that this is in the mold of 64 and Sunshine. When they talk about that, like Nintendo says that themselves, which means they consider Galaxy a different thing, which I originally probably wouldn't have agreed with. But when you think about it, there are very few worlds in Galaxy that have this kind of big openness to them. The one that comes to mind immediately is the bee world, right? With all the honey and the bees and everything. And even when you think about that, like, it changes its landscape for a lot of different stars. And also, when you move into Mario Galaxy 2, they basically remove all of those types of worlds, right? Like, aside from Throwback Galaxy, which is it's a Mario 64 level, there's none of that stuff in Galaxy 2. So you can see where the design lent. Like, the design started out being inspired by 64 and Sunshine, but very gradually, not gradual, I guess, over the course of one game, lent into a more linear design approach.
Yeah, I like what this game is going for. It's like it's just these really, like you said, a little Japanese sort of miniature garden. Like, it's just really interesting little things that you can interact with and do. And I think there will still be a lot of platforming to come, even though that wasn't what they were necessarily demonstrating. I think there's so much more of this game that we've not seen anything of that will arguably be more expansive, more platforming based, but still include the little knickknacks that we're talking about in terms of exploration and discovery when it comes to, sticking your hat on things. Like, we didn't see any gameplay, did we, but was obviously hinted at in the trailer, of sticking Cappy onto a Tyrannosaurus Rex and running.
I think they might have done that in one of the gameplay demos on Treehouse, but I haven't got to that yet because there are a few on their channel.
Okay,
I'm not sure.
I'm just making the point that I think there's an awful lot of this game that we've not seen, and that this might indeed be a longer game than something like a Galaxy or even a Sunshine or something.
It could take you longer for sure if there's a lot of secrets hidden everywhere that will take you a long time to just wander around and discover on your own. And the way that I see it working is the exploration and the platforming segments are going to go hand in hand, as one being a reward for the other, right? So there's like this grate on the ground, like a manhole, that you can throw your cap on and then drag over to reveal like a hole in the ground that you can go down into, and that takes you into a more linear Galaxy-style platforming section, right? So there are going to be a lot of those hidden throughout the world where you are essentially opening up these platforming challenges and getting moons as rewards for doing them, and that is by your exploration. But yeah, for certain, it seems like they found the jump rope where people were just like skipping and jumping, and if you got 30 in a row, then you could get a moon from that. You could take control of the man piloting a remote control car, and if you like piloted it correctly, it would hit a moon and you get one of those. Like, a lot of these little mini interactions with different mechanics giving you moons, just rewarding the exploration and just rewarding interaction, I think, with a lot of the different things in the environment. And I think they talked about how in New Donk City, the first kind of main mission you have from Pauline is to go and get these 4 musicians, and doing that is much more a case of exploring around the city than being good at platforming, right? I mean, you have to be decent to get up on top of buildings and stuff like that, but yeah, it seems like the design ethos is changed somewhat, but I'm excited for it because I think it opens up new possibilities whilst returning to some classic ideas. So,
was all the gameplay you saw in Treehouse with the 2 Joy-Con in 2 separate hands?
No, so I think
Okay.
on one of the next demonstrations they were using Pro Controller only, and I think they were trying to hammer home the point, like, don't worry, you don't have to use this motion control stuff.
Thank God.
Although I believe there's motion stuff still built into the Pro Controller that you have to use, like the move that Mario spins his hat around himself, I believe you have to do like a circular motion even with the Pro Controller in your hand. So,
Eesh.
I don't know, they're still kind of hammering on some of that stuff, which I find a little annoying, but... if there's no other way to do it, then whatever, they can do what they want, and we have no option about it. One thing I really wish Nintendo would do, or it's just any console manufacturer or any game on console, let us rebind keys, for God's sake. Like, something I feel as a PC owner and as someone who has been playing on PC for a while now, I've become used to the luxury of key bindings, which means I can just change any button to whatever I want. So, like, when I'm playing Titanfall 2, like, I don't want the melee to be on that button because that seems really stupid for me in the way I play, so I'm just going to put it on this key instead.
They do that for the virtual console, right? Like, it's
they
not
do,
like
yeah.
Nintendo have gone beyond that. They've actually got a really intricate, impressive system on the Wii U virtual console when it comes to allocating any button you want to any button on all games.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I wish they would just apply that, console-wide for everything. I think it would have helped a lot of people with Zelda, because loads of people complained about that control
Can't
scheme.
run and jump.
Yeah, exactly. So, we'll see. I doubt that's anything that Nintendo are thinking about as a main priority right now, but one can only hope. The last thing I want to bring up about Odyssey is there are different times of day in which you can enter the stages. So if you go in at night, things will change. It'll be like... It's probably the most the stage changes in terms of, like, in Mario 64, when you were going for specific stars, you'd have to go for that specific star in order to get it, right? Because otherwise it wouldn't appear in the world. There are some that appeared all the time, but some you'd have to have specific conditions in order to go and do. The nighttime and daytime stuff seems like those specific conditions for all these kingdoms. So there will be some shift in, like, the layout of the areas, and seems like they're doing it that way, which is cool. It's an interesting way to do it. They showed a lot of stuff. I still need to catch up on some Odyssey, and I know you would probably like to watch some of that stuff as well.
Definitely.
But we will get to it in due course. Next up, Xenoblade Chronicles 2. I've been waiting to get my grubby little hands into this to see what the hell's going on with Xenoblade Bally, because, as you know, one of my favorite games of all time. You love the first Xenoblade as well.
Oh, yeah.
And this was very interesting. So the setup is that you're, I believe, on the back of a creature, like in the original Xenoblade, but apparently there are a bunch of different creatures in the world. So I think that what you're going to be doing is, there seems to be like ships, like whales, that control these like sky ships, essentially, and the entire world is essentially just made of clouds, right? There doesn't seem to be anything below, and it's all in the sky. And so you're basically going to be traveling from like giant creature to giant creature, and there is obviously the big tree, Elysium, which you're trying to get to. And the starter place seems very Colony 9-esque in terms of it's just these green vast fields. And the one thing that I think is interesting is, similar to Final Fantasy in the way that those games aren't necessarily directly connected but share things like enemies, that is what this game has as well. So like they're fighting some Bunnets and some Armus and the kind of things you fight early on in the original Xenoblade. So I like that they've drawn that connection, because in Xenoblade Chronicles X there were very different kind of monsters going on. I think there were some that were similar, but a lot of them were like new and different. And especially that makes sense because it was, they were stuck on a different planet, so you had to have all those different, alien races, as it were. But yeah, it seems like they are retaining, in terms of like connections to the old game, seems like that is the main one, right? And also the fact that the sword kind of looks like the Monado, albeit more of a kind of, Kerrang style, rock heavy, like all these jagged edges to it, style of blade. But so the way it works is, I think we originally thought that the girl was going to be the blade, and so she would just transform into the sword. In actuality, what the blade is basically a character who gives you power while you're fighting with the weapon. And they showed a couple of different party members. There's one who's like a cat girl, and there's a Nopon party member as well. And they all have different blades. And what the system is that you can have, I believe, 3 or so blades equipped at once, and these blades will have all your arts on them. So the UI is very much streamlined. Instead of having the traditional bar across the bottom that we're used to, it's now all bound to the face buttons. So the 4 face buttons control all your different arts. So there's no like scrolling along the line, trying to get to backslash, trying to get to days and all those different arts. You don't have to waste time doing that. Now you can just do at a click of a button, your 4 different arts are mapped to the 4 different face buttons, which I think is a really nice streamlining of it. But what they've done to add complexity, so you don't just have 4 arts instead of, the 9 or so you had on the bar in the original, is you have the D-pad with 3 different blades at once. So you can switch between your different blades, and they all have different arts. So essentially you have, I guess, a similar number that you would have in the original, but it's way more streamlined this time, and it seems like it's much easier to get to.
The line they were using, wasn't it? It was like you're 2 clicks away from any art that you want to use, like without scrolling.
Basically, I don't think they said that necessarily outright, but like what I could see was that was a big focus, and it seems like there's been more of a focus on the break and topple system this time. Instead of just hoping that it breaks, and I don't know if I've got the timing right to topple it, there's a bar at the top, and the bar will count down. So if you inflict break on something, you'll see the timer timing down until that break goes away, so you know how long you have until you can topple them. And then there's like other abilities like launching them or freezing them, like a lot of elemental stuff going in here. It seems like you can stack a lot of those abilities. There's like ultimate stuff that happens, but it's interesting because we all thought that all of the swords were going to be anime girls, but here's the thing, is like the cat girl, her blade is just this giant tiger that she rides on top of. So all the different blades can be all these different manifestations of creatures, and everyone's is different. And it almost had a kind of, I guess, more of a Persona vibe than a Pokemon vibe, but it's the same idea of you're collecting different blades to add to your arsenal,
right,
and they'll all have different arts, so you can swap them in and out essentially. And so over the course of the game, and they went into the menu and there were like hundreds of question marks. So clearly this is like a Pokemon-esque thing where, you got to catch them all, get all the blades basically. But I imagine there are going to be story relevant ones, and the main blade that the main character Rex has is called Pyra, and I imagine she's going to be like very story relevant. So you're probably going to be using her for a lot of the game. But it looks really good, and the town stuff they showed a little bit of. There's NPCs around the place. Didn't see any cutscenes or voice acting, but just running around the field and basically getting down to the combat basics. Looks fantastic. I really think that art style is going to work excellently on the handheld screen. I was a little reticent about, the anime bland faces, but when it's more zoomed out and you kind of see them, it has an almost cel-shaded kind of look to it that stands out really well. And I think it's going to be nice and bright on that screen, and it's just going to look gorgeous. And just the idea of having a handheld Xenoblade that isn't held back by like the technology of 3DS, which I know as much as you enjoyed playing on 3DS, I would say the experience was more limited because of the lack of power on that system.
Yeah.
And now you don't have to worry about that with the big old screen.
Right.
So I'm jazzed, Bally. It looks great, and I'm excited to get into it. But then they showed off Yoshi, which doesn't have a subtitle. It's just called Yoshi.
Have you joined my anti-Yoshi party yet?
No, Bally. Do you want to sell me on your politics on the anti-Yoshi party?
The anti-Yoshi party. It's basically Yoshi's Woolly World is just not that great. It's an okay game, and I think that
some would go so far as to say it's a good game, Bally.
I'd go between okay and good, but I don't know. Yoshi needs to do more than just art style these days, Nbz. That's the thing.
He does, and
he needs to work it out.
Not only is this a kind of similar art style, he's felt this time, Bally. It's a big change. He's not wool anymore. He's felt. All right, get it right. Now he's wandering around a papercraft world, right? And he's on this kind of adventure of foreground and background and flipping the stages around. And so the main mechanic is, you play through the stage once. So what I thought it was going to be is you can flip whenever you want while you're playing. not the case. You have to play through the stage once and then play through it again in the flip version, which just seems like a cheap way of making more levels than you would have usually, you know? Like, that's the cynical way I'm looking at it.
Mirror mode now on your 2D platformer.
Exactly, that's essentially what this is. There is some really cool stuff they do with it, like when you're going on one side, you can see these platforms that are moving in and out of the foreground and background. So, like, if they move in, then Yoshi can't stand on them, and if they're out, they're like platforms he can jump on. And when you go onto the reverse side, you see little Shy Guys, like, pulling these elastic bands, like they're pulling the thing back and forward. And it's really great animation. It looks really cute. And, you know, that's the whole charm of these games, is the way they do that stuff and implement it. And, you know, we praised Woolly World a great deal for the way that it implements that aesthetic into literally every part of its design. And I think a similar thing is going on here. The thing is, Bally, from what I saw, and, you know, I only watched maybe 10-15 minutes because I got really bored of it, it seems like there is no focus on platforming whatsoever in this game. There is a linear path that Yoshi walks on. It's all coloured out in yellow, and sometimes he goes a bit in the foreground, sometimes the background, and it seems very doubling down on just collectibles, because you can knock out environmental things in the background. Actually, when you knock something out and it goes flying into the background, it looks really cool. Like, there's some great visual touches here, but it is honestly quite bland when it comes to the platforming aspects. It's like, okay, I hit this thing and I uncovered a secret, which is like, you know, your traditional Yoshi unlockables, the red coins and the sunflower faces and things like that. And inevitably, you're going to have to go through multiple times to get them all. You could probably have to play through the stage on both flip sides of it to get every collectible, right? And it was basically just walking this linear path. Now, I will give it that that's probably the first level, or like very early on in the game, so you wouldn't expect it to be very complex platforming. But even what we saw in the trailer didn't look like it advanced that much, and they seem to really just want to focus on the foreground-background interaction as opposed to any solid, interesting platforming. And that basically means I'm not interested in this game, right?
Yeah, I think we've been over it before, where the 2D platformer has been to some really extreme and interesting places, and we've both played a very large number of 2D platformers at numerous graphical styles, paces, mechanics, all sorts of things. And when a new 2D platformer comes along, it really has to do something either incredibly unique or incredibly special, or a combination done well. And I know neither of us have seen much of this game, and it's not fair to judge so quickly, but we need something from it that just makes it a bit more exciting.
Yeah, and I was hopeful about it because, you know, I think that they can do some good stuff. Good Feel are a great company, and they've made one of my favorite 2D platformers, which is Wario Land Shake It, or Shake Dimension, depending on your region. I really wish they would go back to Wario Land. Can we have a new Wario Land, someone, please? Like, that needs to be a prediction for next time. Or even WarioWare. Where the hell is Wario, basically? We just need Where is Wario, as in Where is Wally, you know? You just gotta find him. He's disappeared. But in any case, yeah, it's doubling down on my least favorite aspects of Woolly World, which were get every fucking collectible in this level. And it basically seems to be a game about just getting every fucking collectible in the level with nothing else to embellish it. And that seems harsh right now because I haven't seen a lot of it, but hey, first impressions matter, right? And it's not giving me a good one. So that was most of the stuff that I watched from the Treehouse. There's been a lot of different things going on. There are a couple of announcements of video games that we didn't touch on last time. Obviously, we touched on Samus Returns, the new 2D Metroid game, which I think, having watched, you know, some of that gameplay, that seems okay, and it seems like something I will definitely, you know, I'm going to pick up it regardless.
The Nintendo podcasts I've listened to are a lot more hyped about it than you, Nbz.
Well, no, the thing is, a lot of people that I've listened to have talked about it seem to share my opinion. A lot of people who I feel like have similar tastes in games. Like, Dan Reichert was discussing it on the evening show of Giant Bomb, and he was like, yeah, they announced this new 2D Metroid, and it's made by Mercury Steam, which gives you pause. Like, I'm not saying that Mercury Steam are going to do a bad job with this game, because under Nintendo's tutelage, they could do very well. but their history gives you pause, right? And the visual style gives you pause. And the idea that AM2R already came out, it doesn't look good for this game.
Did you get
right?
that?
What do you think about it from that perspective?
That trailer working in 3D. I've not had a chance to look at it yet.
So it's really weird. I went onto the eShop and I couldn't find anywhere to download the trailer that people have been talking about. It might just be on the US eShop, because I went to the European one, and all I got was just a crappy, not downloaded one, but just one that streams from the eShop itself, and it wasn't in 3D at all. It used like the screen of the 3DS on my screen of the 3DS, so it was like zoomed out even more. It was just really weird, and it was bad. So I will look again, but I can't find it anywhere. I really want to see that thing in 3D, because I think that will change my opinion on it quite significantly. But we'll get to that. But yeah, anyway, the other announcements that they made were a couple of different games, very minute ones, and this is the kind of level of announcement that went, because people always are like, oh, the Treehouse usually has some announcements, but I'm like, yeah, but none of these are actual significant announcements. There are people out there who are like holding out for them to announce Animal Crossing. I'm like, you don't fucking think they would have done Animal Crossing in their main thing?
But yeah, I know, but they did do 2D Metroid.
Right, but it's slightly different with that, because it was directly after the spotlight had finished. It was within the first hour,
right?
So more people than usual would have been tuning in. These other
Reggie
ones,
had
there was no
smirk.
way they were going to be significant.
Yeah,
he did. But so they announced Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga DX, which everyone knew about forever because it had been leaked from the eShop, and it's plus Bowser's minions. People are like, what the hell is that? Turns out that they've added kind of a bonus chapter, as it were, to this game, which follows the exploits of Bowser's minions. You play as Goombas and all this stuff in a like extra story, which is nice. It means they're not just putting out the same game again. They're actually giving you something additional to it for a lot of people who have probably played this game already and just want to maybe go back through. I think that was something that Reggie brought up in an interview where he's like, look, we're trying with these kind of deluxe versions or like remakes of our games to add something significant to them. And I think that's a pretty good thing to add as like extra single player stuff for that very beloved game. Honestly, I fucking despise the art style that Alpha Dream has had in this generation with 3DS. I think none of their games look nice. The 3D helps them, but like it's a very washed out, really ugly kind of sprite art. And Superstar Saga looks beautiful on GBA. I would way prefer to wait for a virtual console release of that on Switch and play the original as opposed to this re-release. But there are people out there like you, Bally, who've never played any of these games, and this is the first one in the series. So
okay, I
imagine there are people interested.
And is that Switch or 3DS?
That is 3DS. It uses the engine, the 3DS engine, and it makes sense honestly because they've had that engine for a while and they've pumped out 2 games with it, I think, with Dream Team and with Paper Jam. So this is the third one, and I guess they're just gonna do that as a stopgap while they probably work on another Mario and Luigi for Switch in the future. That's the one I'm gonna be looking out for. They announced another game as well, Bally, which we just watched the trailer for. Do you want to describe this game in any words that you have?
Anime, sushi,
sushi.
Action puzzler, Japan.
Good. This is a very good description.
Yes.
This game is called Sushi Strikers, and I watched a little bit of the Treehouse demonstration of it. Essentially, it looks like you and your opponent, you're on 2 separate screens. One's on the bottom screen, one's on the top. I think you're playing on the bottom screen because you have to use the touch screen, and you're basically trying to match the colors of these plates of sushi to build up ammo that you can then fire at your opponent. And so it seems really interesting. It's kind of this mix of an action game with a puzzle game and very touchscreen heavy. You can clearly get a lot of combos if you're good at that sort of stuff. I've never been really into that kind of game, a lot of like stacking of
action
different colors together and stuff.
Puyo Tetris.
I think, yeah, kind of like that, but also there's stuff like Pokemon Puzzle League, which is a lot more about switching blocks really quickly and just stacking up combos, and this seems kind of similar to that, although it's a different style. and it seems fun and neat. My one reservation is this should probably be a $15 download, and it's because it's Nintendo, it's probably not going to be. It's probably going to be 30 quid in a box, and you buy it. That's what they do. But I know that this is probably farthest away from anything you would play, Bally. Although it's kind of a puzzle thing that you might be interested in. Do you have any interest?
It's not a million miles away, but it looks interesting. But I think Nintendo have given me way too much for my plate this E3 to me. I'm actually really happy with the number of like things I'm interested and keen to pick up like in the next year or so. So it's unlikely I'm going to pick up this game. But those are for good reasons, nothing against this game.
For me, games like this are the sort of thing that when we're 3 or 4 years away from the 3DS and it's said its final goodbye, like I did with DS, it's like going back into that library and finding cheap copies and going online and being like, hey, this thing's down to 10 quid, I'll pick it up. And there's that kind of sweet spot in between when a console is old and has low prices to when it starts getting nostalgic with people and the prices start fucking skyrocketing, right? Like we've seen it in recent years with GameCube, where previously you could probably get some GameCube games pretty cheap, but now, god damn it, the rare ones are really expensive. So yeah, that's what I'll probably do at some point is, 3DS has a fucking killer library, and there are a lot of deep cuts that I want to get to at some point. Yeah. And this seems like one that in future years I will get to. So then, aside from those two game announcements, there are a couple like minor announcements that are related to other games. There's going to be a co-op mode in Super Mario Odyssey, where one player takes a Joy-Con and controls the hat. That seems to be an interesting thing because they have motion controls built in. For me, similar to Mario Galaxies mode, where you just have someone shooting star bits, doesn't seem like it's that in depth. But yeah, do you think this is something that you might get any use out of, Bally, when you're playing a bit of Odyssey? Have Caroline jump in with the hat as an addition?
Maybe not Caroline. More sort of when I'm 45 years old and my child wants to play Mario Odyssey with me and I say, hey, you can be the hat, and then they come along and play. It's that kind of
when you're revisiting Odyssey.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's more aimed at that sort of parent-child, let's play a game together and help each other out sort of thing, more so than a cooperative game with two gamers on a similar level, for example.
Yeah. It does seem like it's kind of more throwaway. And I don't know how interesting or engaging it would be, but at least they have it there for people. That's definitely something that is, Nintendo always like to add some kind of multiplayer into their games, even in the single player stuff. So that is there. And then the other announcement was there is a new character in ARMS, which is in the main game, and you fight him at the end of the Grand Prix, but they hadn't announced it because I don't think ARMS had come out at this point, right? Because E3 was going until Thursday, and then ARMS came out on Friday. His name is Max Brass, and I don't know if you can actually unlock him in the game, but they showed him off on Treehouse, and his special ability is that he can basically puff up his chest and not be flinched when he takes a hit, which is kind of useful because when you get knocked down in ARMS, you're put at a disadvantage, and people can easily grab you when you get up and stuff like that. So that seems okay. He looks interesting. Not really a character that jumps out at me, but he's there. Yeah. Any thoughts on Max Brass? There's not really much to say. I don't know.
I'm thinking, like, with ARMS, I need to see. I want to see more of a backstory with these characters. I think the world they've created is a great one, but I want to know more about that world. Like if you compare it to, look at what they've done with Splatoon, where they introduce you to new parts of the world, and they say, "Oh, look here's like the outer reaches of the world where you do like Salmon Run, etc." Like they've layered up interesting things about that world, and I hope that ARMS does the same. I mean, it obviously will if it's a successful game, but I'm hoping they go for some sort of evolution of that world in some way.
Yeah, it's definitely something I think they're going to try and do, and especially as more updates happen and things come out for ARMS, they're going to build on it. And I think maybe character and trailers and stuff like that are a good way to do it, to introduce people and build a hype cycle around it. Is follow a model that your other game has with Smash Brothers, where you really start to get people excited every time there's a new announcement happening. So that's something that they can worry about in the future. But there have also been a few interviews going around. Reggie's been here and there, and Koizumi has done some stuff, and Takahashi, as I mentioned before, had an interview, and people have been saying a lot of different things. Speaking of ARMS and kind of those characters and Overwatch, Reggie name-checked Overwatch in a Glixel interview, and I just wanted to bring it up because it never happens. So here's the thing. We always talk about how Reggie in modern Nintendo never even mentions like PlayStation or Xbox by name. Like they're basically kryptonite to him, where in the past, and we commented on it when we were watching the old E3 presentations, when they were like calling out PSP
look
by
how much
name.
We're kicking their ass. Look at this. Look how many they've sold. That we've sold all of these. Look at how terrible the PS4 is. PS4.
Yeah.
PS3 is 2, whatever.
Yeah. So back then they were definitely trying to be direct competition, right? And that's where that came from. But these days, Nintendo obviously see them as very different, and they kind of set themselves apart from the other companies. And it is so rare that Reggie name checks any non-Nintendo video game. And so I noticed it in this interview, and I'm not saying that it means Overwatch is coming to Switch, but I do find it very curious that he deliberately name checks that game.
He's saying Overwatch is a game that's eating into our sales because that's what we do, sort of thing. It's like
creating valuable IP essentially.
Exactly, a valuable IP that's based at a more family audience, even though it's still got it's a very not niche. That's the wrong word. Like it's still got a big online following that are just obsessed with that game.
So yeah, I picked that out, and I was like, this is an interesting nugget because it may signal that they have been having talks with Blizzard, and I think Blizzard mentioned at some point that they could maybe get Overwatch to run, but it would need some help. So Nintendo, got to get your wallet out and start working with these companies because maybe the thing that I've been thinking about is if Nintendo put one of their characters in the Switch version of Overwatch. That would be fucking crazy. It would kind of be like
Samus,
Link in Soul Calibur 2, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's the way that they get these ports, is like adding the Nintendo value to it.
Yeah, definitely. And then, getting Blizzard to play ball and say, let us insert one of our characters into your game world is a big ask, but it's not
having Tracer in Smash Brothers. That'd be real weird, but that could be a world we're living in the next couple of years. We shall see.
A character trade.
Yeah. Oh God.
There you go.
It starts to get like sports, doesn't it? Where players moving around and it's just like characters jumping ship. We shall see. Another thing that was brought up was whether Mario is human or not, which this is a funny thing from Waypoint, and they're the kind of people who would ask these kind of questions. And I think the answer that they're given is really great. And so the developers like, Mario is human, and they're like, really? Why is he so different? And then the developer's like, in the world there are many different types of people, It's like, okay, well, I guess
He's
that's
just
the
like
answer.
that, all right?
Yeah, I know. I think they asked Bill Trinan on NVC as well about why.
I think he gave an even worse answer. I think he just said, Mario's Mario.
He's from the Mushroom Kingdom, and this isn't the Mushroom Kingdom, I believe it boiled down to. So
wow,
a lot of weird things being asked at this E3 for sure.
It's like the sort of thing that Giant Bomb talk about, where they get into the lore of Mario, and then this whole E3 they've just sort of run away with it. Like they've all had that sort of Giant Bomb joke,
Exactly. They've doubled down, and I like when these questions are asked because there's some real weird stuff around Nintendo and their characters. Other interviews that we can look up, Kotaku had one with Reggie where Stephen Totillo was asking him, why the hell they're using this mobile app as a solution, and Reggie just keeps saying, nope, we're doing it, it's on the app, you're gonna do it. And he had a response that seemed interesting, but also I still don't kind of align along their thought pattern, because essentially
Who
Reggie
does?
Reggie has to deal with people being like, why the fuck are you doing this? And I'm sure Reggie is like,
doesn't know.
fucking, I don't know why the fuck we're doing this, but Japan said we're doing it, so I have to justify it, alright? Like, he's in a real bad place. He's like, God, I have to justify these things that they've done. But yeah, there was another kind of jab about GameCube game on Virtual Console, and Reggie's like, I see a lot of consumers hoping and wishing for that online, which could mean one of two things. It could be like, yeah, dream on, Sonny Jim, or it could mean, it's probably happening. So the dream is still alive, Bally.
Well,
what's your
Nintendo-
percentage chance for GameCube right now?
I was just going to say quickly, Nintendo joked about Mother 3 in that 2014, I want to say, E3, and it's still not here. So, like, just because Nintendo joke about something doesn't mean it's... I agree, I think it's coming, but it doesn't mean it's coming anytime soon. Sorry, your question was, when do I think Virtual Console's coming?
No, GameCube, the percentage chance that it will happen.
I think 80-90% it will happen. I think also 80-90% chance it won't happen this year, but we'll see.
Very likely.
Who knows? I think there could be a direct that just gets a lot of this UI stuff that we've been talking about out the way, that's more interesting to a really niche hardcore audience that is more likely to tune into a Nintendo Direct above an E3 press conference.
Yeah. The other interesting part of this interview is kind of aligns with what I have been saying, which is because they are tying up Virtual Console stuff with their online service, Reggie basically says, when we talk about the online service, then we'll communicate about our legacy content, which I think means they're going to have a different approach this time. And I don't know if they will do the a la carte thing anymore. But aside from that, just little things here and there. Stuff about let me see. Yeah, Metroid being discussed as to why Nintendo announced Metroid so early. And Reggie was basically saying, we do things game by game, and this has been a franchise that people have been, wanting new information on, and it's something that we needed to do because we wanted to share it early. And he's like, other games want to hold it closer to reveal and show gameplay then. But, it seems, it makes sense. It is obviously a game-by-game thing. But, that's Reggie for you. He has to justify every decision.
We felt like melting the internet this E3 rather than next one, basically, is the answer.
Right, exactly.
We knew it would have a huge impact, and we just thought, why not do it now? Why not? Basically,
yeah. They saw Sony and they were like, well, everyone talks about Sony because they do that shit. How about we do that shit? And then we can we can rule the day. So makes sense. But that's a lot of the scraps of E3 going around. It was a good year, I think. Some interesting stuff happening across the board. The other thing I want to talk about was the appearance of Miyamoto on the Ubisoft stage, but I think you still haven't seen that, Bally, which I recommend you still go and watch.
I've not yet. I just know of it.
Yeah, it's great, and just that whole demonstration of Mario and Rabbids was really effective generally, and I think Ubisoft did... The thing that I found good about Ubisoft's press conference was, as much as people love to talk about Sony and how they don't, there's no talking on stage or anything, when Ubisoft presented a game that was new, they had someone out there explaining it clearly, going through gameplay and talking over the gameplay as it was happening, and it really let you understand what the game was and what was happening in it and what, the ultimate goal was. And I think that's something that a lot of companies could benefit from, because sometimes they just drop a trailer. Like in Microsoft, when there was this game that happened that was like this esport, and it was kind of Hunger Games style, similar to PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, and they just cut to this guy shoutcasting it on stage, this fucking bearded guy, and he's just like shouting a bunch of shit, and it's just like, what the fuck is even going on here? Like, no one has any idea, and then they just move on to another thing, and that game could be really cool, but you're just left with an impression of what the fuck even was that, and why should I care? So that's definitely a thing that I think could be benefited by some people. But in any case, that's pretty much going to wrap us up for this week. A lot of things to be chatting about and a lot of things for the future, and we'd like you to talk about them with us. So Bally, remind us again of that email address where people can send their ideas, concerns, and thoughts of Nintendo and all their stuff.
Please send your emails to ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That's ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. We want to hear what you have to say. It makes the show better.
Absolutely. It does indeed. You can also review us on iTunes and in various places. Is there other places than iTunes that you could review us? I'm not
I don't
sure.
know. Tell us if you know of a place where you can review us other than iTunes, and then we'll plug it for eternity.
Exactly. But for now, just iTunes. We got a new review, Bally, which is fantastic. This review is from Hannibal A-Team. The title is The Best Small-Scale Video Game Cast Available. And they say, I've been watching Zed since the first instances of him uploading competitive Pokemon content on YouTube. I'm still a huge fan of his stuff. This is one of the best video game-related podcasts that I listen to on a weekly basis. I would recommend this to anyone. Keep up the great work, you two. Well, thank you, Hannibal, for the kind words. And you can join them in, the iTunes, history logs of our ratings. So if you would like to do that, it'd be the archives, the Jedi archives, very appreciative. If you go in there, don't pull a Count Dooku and delete the archives. That'd be very bad. We want to have as many reviews as possible. So go do it.
Maybe someone deleted it.
Bally, you have a future in child voice acting. I'll tell you
that's what quote from episode 2. There we go.
It is, yeah. Anyway, Bally, where can people find you and your terrible episode 2 quotes on the internet?
You can find me on Twitter. I'm at Ballyman91. That's BALLYMAN91. Also, check out the podcast Twitter account, which is at TNL Podcast. That's at TNL Podcast. That's the best place to go for all the latest episodes when videos come out on our YouTube channel as well, which of course is youtube.com/ThisNintendoLife.
It is indeed. You can find me on the Twitters at Lord Nbz. As we said before, check us out on iTunes. We're on Stitcher as well. Any podcasting app that you download, you should be able to find us. Although right now podcasts are bleeding out of my ears. I think I have some 50 unplayed podcasts. It's gotten out of control, Bally. E3 is it brings a lot of stuff to my plate.
If you're someone who found our podcast through E3, because we always have a few more listeners when it comes to this time of year. If you managed to stick around for this show following finding us at E3, thank you for sticking around, and we hope you will listen in the future.
Absolutely. It's always great to get some new listeners in, and hopefully you like our show. We try and do as best we can. That's pretty much it. So until next time, thank you everyone for tuning in, for listening, for sticking with us. And we'll be back in a couple of weeks' time with some more Nintendo, some more podcasting, and some more This Nintendo Life. Thanks everyone. Goodbye. The musical interlude used on today's show was A Cargo of Fineries from Shovel Knight Spectre of Torment. Copyright Yacht Club Games 2017. Alright. I'll read the interview at the end then. Why did your review? Fucking damn it! Bye! Messing with my brain. No. Damn it.